The chamber wasn't crowded in the usual fashion. It wasn't filled with disengaged officials or half-asleep subcommittees. It was filled with people who knew, before a single word was spoken, that this day wouldn't follow protocol. This wasn't about tech policy or regulatory frameworks. It wasn't about Section 230 content flags or moderation protocols. It was about something far heavier, truth. And this time, it came with documentation. Before we go further on this incredible story, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Cameras lined the perimeter like sentinels. CNN had its prime anchor locked in. MSNBC brought out its constitutional expert. The New York Times already had an op-ed ready to launch, just in case Elon snapped. But the man who entered didn't resemble a tech titan under fire. He looked like someone carrying evidence to a trial. Elon Musk walked in composed. No entourage, no spectacle, just a black binder tucked beneath his arm labeled Twitter Files, Volume 10. The noise faded into an unnatural stillness as he sat, not out of deference, but because everyone was waiting. Because, for once, it wasn't big tech under scrutiny. It was the government. And then she arrived. Nancy Pelosi, master of the message, commander of silence, the strategist who turned procedural nuance into empire. She walked in with the same poised precision she always had, camera-conscious, entourage aligned, posture flawless. Her reputation clad in decades of media praise and institutional protection. She smiled, but for the first time, it didn't read as confidence. It looked rehearsed, because today, she wasn't steering the questions. The gavel struck. The Committee on Oversight and Accountability will now come to order. The placards read, Topic, Government Censorship and Platform Manipulation. Beneath the surface, something long overdue had arrived. Without fanfare, Musk leaned into the mic. No theatrics, no grandstanding, just a calm, sharp tone like a scalpel sliding from its sheath. Madam Speaker, he began, I'm not here to defend a company. I'm here to defend truth and to expose who tried to bury it. The words rippled not only across the room, but through every live feed, every podcast earbud, every reporter's notes. Staffers froze. Pelosi blinked, then gave that familiar smile, the same one that had disarmed the press for 2 decades. But Musk wasn't blinking. He wasn't playing politics. He was here to burn the house down. He opened the binder. What I'm about to share aren't claims. They aren't conjecture. They aren't partisan conspiracies. They are internal records, emails, Slack threads, meeting logs from Twitter's own staff. Engineers, legal advisors, policy leads, all documenting a consistent pattern of political pressure. From your office, he looked straight at Pelosi. This wasn't content moderation. It was censorship, and not to shield the public, but to protect your power. Pelosi shifted slightly. This wasn't the typical partisan grandstanding she was accustomed to batting away with a quote and a chuckle. This was different. This was Musk with evidence. He tapped a remote. A screen lit up behind him. Email subject, urgent, from Speaker's office. Date, October 14th, 2022. Department, Twitter Government Affairs. Hunter Biden content is becoming a liability. Flag and suppress. Needs escalation ASAP. A second screen blinked on. Slack message. Pelosi's office on again. Asking for trending tags to be buried before morning cycle. Musk returned to the mic. The laptop wasn't disinformation. The story wasn't fake. But the suppression? That was real. And it came from Congress. Let the record show. It wasn't Twitter that silenced the news. It was the speaker. Twitter just obeyed the hand that fed it. This wasn't about policy. It was about power. You claim to defend democracy, Madam Speaker. Musk continued. But these documents tell a different story. He turned to another page. They list journalists, academics, regular citizens. Some posted about COVID. Others questioned foreign connections. Some merely criticized your record. All of them. Tagged, limited, silenced. He clicked again. Excel file, do not amplify list. Names appeared. New York Post, Libs of TikTok, James Woods, Paul Pelosi stock tracker. The last one drew gasp from a few corners of the room. This wasn't moderation. This was algorithmic immunity, granted to political royalty, and Pelosi stood at its center. She leaned forward, mouth parting slightly. But Musk pressed on. You visited salons mid-lockdown. You traded stocks while drafting economic policy. You stood on podiums and demanded accountability while burying evidence that questioned your own. And the platforms helped, not because they had to, but because you told them to. You didn't warn about disinformation. You suppressed truth. You didn't protect democracy. You curated perception. And now you sit here hoping no one checks the metadata. This wasn't a hearing. It was the autopsy of a narrative. And Musk had brought the coroner's report. He closed the binder, but the room felt like it was still on fire. The chamber lights buzzed faintly overhead. But something deeper charged the air, an undeniable realization that the facade was cracking. This wasn't testimony. This was a revelation. Across from him, Pelosi sat in her usual performance. Hands folded, face composed, eyelids heavy with calculation. But the control was slipping, not all at once, but piece by piece beneath the weight of evidence. Musk hadn't come to debate. He came to deliver indictment. He opened the binder again. I won't speculate, he said. I'll show you. He clicked again. Slack thread, October 14th, 2020. Another ping from Pelosi's office, asking to remove Hunter laptop thread, flagging as unsafe, suppression to be applied across search and feed. There was no gasp this time, just silence. Too stunned for sound. This wasn't mass reporting. This wasn't an algorithm error. It was a direct order from the speaker's staff about a real story. Silence because it was politically dangerous. The screen shifted again. Email from gov-team@twitter.com. 2. Trust and Safety Ops. Subject, urgent, Pelosi request. Limit spread of Paul Pelosi stock trading posts. Source unconfirmed. Escalate immediately. Musk turned to the room. This isn't content moderation. It's political optics management, coded into an algorithm. This wasn't about fake news. It was about bad headlines. He turned back to Pelosi. You didn't combat falsehoods. You buried inconvenient truths. And you called it protection. The words landed with weight. Not because of volume, but because of inevitability. For the first time in decades, Nancy Pelosi wasn't controlling the narrative. She was the subject of its footnotes. And they weren't kind. The Twitter files reveal, Musk said that during the 2020 election, your office repeatedly pressured Twitter to take down content. Posts about Hunter Biden, about Paul Pelosi's trades. Some were jokes, some were articles. All were removed. Not because of violations, but because they disrupted your image. Another screen. Internal memo. Q3 coordination plan. DNC plus Pelosi office. High sensitivity flagging protocol. Route political content through trust channels. Label, restrict, suppress if necessary. Let me put that plainly, Musk said. If it made you look corrupt, it was unsafe. If it questioned your wealth, it was misinformation. If it was inconvenient, it vanished. Government power had merged with private censorship. Platforms became the state's digital enforcers. Trust and safety had become the Ministry of Narrative Control. He turned toward the press gallery. Where were the journalists? Where was the New York Times when a sitting speaker used secret channels to erase digital footprints? Where was CNN when parody accounts were gagged by political request? Where was the Washington Post's passion for protecting democracy when it was Pelosi dimming the lights? He didn't wait for answers. Everyone already knew. Journalism hadn't died in darkness. It was smothered by selective silence. He turned the final page. One last entry. October 2022, mere weeks before the election. A senior policy executive at Twitter wrote, Pelosi's office stressed the importance of limiting virality prior to early voting, especially concerning the laptop. Model weights will be adjusted accordingly. Elon paused. That's not moderation, he said. That's political manipulation via machine learning. That's the public square being silently converted into a tactical command center. And the public? They never gave permission. Pelosi didn't flinch, but the illusion she carried had. Because once an algorithm becomes a weapon, you lose the right to pretend it's neutral. Elon Musk, he said, leaning forward, I've studied free speech. It doesn't need a leash, it needs daylight. In your office, Madam Speaker, build a roof over every conversation you couldn't choreograph. He shut the binder, but the screen behind him lingered. An image overlay of Paul Pelosi's stock transactions, lining up perfectly with legislative sessions and DOJ probes. The timestamps matched. In the corner, a Slack message. Team wants reduced discussion on this, especially from verified accounts. Implement quiet suppression. This was the new censorship, not in military boots, but in browser scripts. Not by knocking down doors, but by collapsing digital reach. And Pelosi? She wasn't a bystander. She was in the cockpit. You didn't safeguard democracy, Elon continued. You recompiled it. You debugged dissent. You reprogrammed dialogue. You turned neutral platforms into control panels and called it progress. The chamber held its breath, but outside, the truth had already gone viral. Because for once, someone didn't just bring the evidence, they brought the code base. And the speaker? She wasn't above it. She was logged in the massive, humming gears of modern governance. The most dangerous weapon isn't legislation. It's the algorithm. It doesn't bark. It doesn't kick in your door. It doesn't carry a badge or bang a gavel. It just rearranges the visible until reality becomes a product and truth a casualty. In this new framework, Elon exposed Nancy Pelosi not as a passive benefactor, but as one of its chief engineers. The silence in the hearing room wasn't tension. It was the quiet shock of revelation, a growing awareness that the nation Americans believed they lived in, open, pluralistic, unfiltered, had been reshaped behind their backs into a hallway with one narrative, one voice, one official version of the truth. At the eye of the storm sat the speaker, groomed, composed, unreadable. But now, stripped of her shield, because Elon had brought data, and he wasn't finished. He opened a new folder. Matte black, red tabs, do not amplify, internal Twitter policy files. Subject, 2020 election suppression models. No more euphemisms, Elon said, voice calm but cutting. What I'm about to show you isn't a hypothesis. It's not a theory. It's a list of Americans, not extremists, not criminals, writers, doctors, reporters, silenced not because they broke rules, but because they posted truth at the wrong time. The screen behind him glowed with names. Alex Berenson, journalist, COVID policy critic. Dr. J. Bhattacharya, Stanford epidemiologist, Great Barrington Declaration co-author. Libs of TikTok, cultural commentary account. Babylon Bee, satire site. Tucker Carlson, commentator. Project Veritas, investigative outlet. Paul Pelosi, stock tracker, anonymous data analyst. Each name was paired with metadata. Visibility limited, search suppressed, trending disabled, amplification score, 0.0. This wasn't about safety, Elon said, turning to the committee. It was strategy, electoral engineering written in code. He flipped to another slide. Slack message, October 23, 2020. Request from Pelosi's team. Suppress these accounts through early voting. Sensitive tag. Escalate immediately. Another, same day. Elevate WH coordination. Paul Pelosi content crossed visibility threshold. Limit reach platform-wide. And finally, 3 days before the election, DNC submitted high-risk narratives. Pelosi office reinforced. No boost for Biden-Ukraine hunter or Pelosi stock until post-November 4. Apply suppression under election protocol. The room stirred. The gallery stopped typing. Even MSNBC sat still. Because this wasn't platform safety. It was campaign choreography masquerading as civic hygiene. Madam Speaker, Elon said, eyes locked on her, you told Americans you were defending democracy. But you weren't. You were redesigning it. Not through bills, not through debate, but through narrative control. He paused just enough to let the weight settle. The digital town square was quietly refashioned into a walled garden, and you held the pruning shears. When Americans asked why your husband's trades outperformed Wall Street, their posts disappeared. When physicians challenged lockdown policy, their reach was clipped. When a comedy site mocked your party's double standards, it was flagged as hate. He clicked again. Side-by-side screenshots appeared. Left. Breaking. Paul Pelosi earns $1.5 million in NVIDIA calls before CHIP Act vote. Suppressed. Not eligible for trending. Flagged by GovTeam. Right? Trump tried to destroy democracy. Here's how we stop him. Boosted. Partner pinned. These weren't moderation errors, Elon said. They were policy weights. This was a loop, a feedback system between government and tech, designed to reinforce not facts but favored perceptions. The press once called it misinformation defense. In reality, it was an electoral blacklist coded for impact. And you weren't alone, Elon added. The DNC, DHS, even the FBI liaison, every cog in the pipeline. But it was your office that determined the priority queue. Your office that told Twitter what to bury. Your office that told the American people what they weren't allowed to see. Until it was politically safe. He let the silence hang. You turned a social platform into a perception filter. That filter into a firewall. That firewall into a campaign weapon. The irony was cosmic. The woman who'd spent years crying foul over election interference had quietly pioneered a far subtler, far more effective version of it. Not with fake ballots, but with missing information. And the press? They called it responsible moderation. They didn't report on suppression. They amplified it. Because somewhere along the line, they stopped being watchdogs and became part of the machine. Elon closed the folder. Madam Speaker, he said evenly, this was never about disinformation. It was about dissent. And under your leadership, dissent became a category of threat. He scanned the room. You didn't silence enemies of democracy. You silenced its defenders. Around him, the silence deepened. Not fear, yet, but something colder. The unmistakable hush that follows revelation. The collective realization that something had just shifted and could not be unseen. This wasn't just about government overreach or algorithmic censorship. What Elon was unveiling was more insidious. A DNA strand of control. One part economic, the other informational. Twisted together into a system so seamless, so quiet. No watchdog had dared challenge it until this moment. He tapped the remote. The screen behind him illuminated with a clean, unassuming chart. Stark, precise, brutal. Paul Pelosi's stock transactions, 2019 to 2022, layered over a timeline of congressional briefings and legislative sessions. Color-coded markers highlighted individual stock symbols. NVIDIA, NVDA, Alphabet, GOGL, Visa, V, Microsoft, MSFT, Tesla, TSLA. Each purchase spike correlated eerily with private briefings or legislation still hidden from public view. Let's talk patterns, Elon said, because numbers don't care about spin, and math doesn't care about politics. He pointed at marker. July 2022, Paul Pelosi exercises call options in NVIDIA valued up to $5 million. 2 days later, the House opens final deliberations on the CHIPS Act, $52 billion aimed at the semiconductor industry. NVIDIA surges. That wasn't foresight, Elon said. That was leverage. And it wasn't just the markets being steered, it was the narrative. He flipped to the next page in the binder. A new chart. Twitter files do not amplify list 2022. At the top were public accounts like at Pelosi Tracker, at Unusual Whales, and at Quiver Quant. Independent researchers, journalists, and analysts who were doing one thing, tracking legally required disclosures of congressional trades. Their fate? Suppressed. Shadow banned. Silenced. Per internal records, at the request of sensitive parties. These weren't bots, Elon said. They weren't spreading fake news. They were publishing official public filings. And your office tried to bury them. Another click, a Slack message lit the screen. Pelosi's office isn't happy about the NVIDIA talk. Flag as misinformation. Possible correlation to vote calendar. Recommend limiting visibility. Another entry. Can we ensure Pelosi trades doesn't trend today? This wasn't about stabilizing the market, Elon said. It was about shielding the machine. He looked up. You didn't regulate information. You erased it when it threatened your family's bottom line. And this, he explained, was the full circle of the con. Pelosi's power wasn't just legislative. It was predictive. It was built on the ability to see market reactions before the market even blinked and to erase the trail when the public caught on. "Your family treated Wall Street like a private casino," he said, and silenced the cameras when the bets hit big. The room was frozen, not in surprise, but in the starkness of hearing it said aloud. On the record, with receipts. But Elon wasn't done. He brought up a new document, the Stock Act 2.0, a proposal that would ban members of Congress and their spouses from trading individual stocks. And at the top of the opposition, Nancy Pelosi. He read her quote aloud. "We're a free market economy. They should be able to participate in that." Elon looked up. "You called it participation. But when you write the rules, oversee the watchdogs, and muzzle the scrutiny, that's not participation. That's fixing the game." Another file loaded. House Ethics Committee Notes, 2021. Internal memos revealed how Pelosi's staff worked behind the scenes to stall expansion of the Stock Act, citing complex logistics and member autonomy. All while, in the same time frame, Paul Pelosi executed trades surpassing $50 million in a single quarter. This wasn't a blind spot, Elon said. It was a business model, funded by inside access, protected by political clout, reinforced by digital platforms. He turned toward the press bench. "Where were you?" he asked. Where was the front-page outrage when the Speaker of the House stonewalled ethics reform, while her husband's portfolio outperformed the S&P by triple digits? He gestured to the screen again. Where was the curiosity when accounts exposing it were flagged as spam? He paused. "You weren't watchdogs. You were pets, silenced by access, tamed by proximity to power." One final chart appeared. A simple line graph. Nancy Pelosi's reported net worth, 2004, $21 million. 2022, over $140 million. Congressional salaries don't create that kind of growth, Elon said, but well-timed trades do. He let the silence stretch. "You weren't representing the people," he said. "You were gambling against them and deleting the evidence." Elon closed the folder. This isn't about left or right. It's not Democrat or Republican. It's about a speaker who turned privileged information into profit and criticism into silence. He leaned forward, eyes locked on the dais. "Madam Speaker, the only thing more corrupt than abusing power is pretending you earned it." He paused one last time. When disagreement isn't debated, it's erased. When questions aren't encouraged, they're criminalized. When asking the wrong thing makes you dangerous, freedom has already begun to rot. That decay didn't arrive overnight, he said. It was built deliberately, step by step, narrative by narrative. And at the heart of it all stood a woman who mastered perception the way others master law. Nancy Pelosi. The silence in the room deepened, not from fatigue, but from gravity. Something irreversible had just been spoken aloud. Elon Musk stood, not as a tech titan, but as a witness to a mechanism built to remain unseen. Not because it didn't exist, but because it was designed to be invisible, cloaked in press briefings, justified by safety, defended with fear. "Let's be clear," Elon said, calm as ever. "This wasn't about preventing harm. It was about managing thought. And that control, it didn't start with Silicon Valley. It started right here." He tapped his fingers on the table, quiet but deliberate. Before him sat the evidence, emails, directives, logs, communications between the Speaker's office, federal agencies, party strategists, and tech platforms, all working not as separate entities, but as one coordinated engine. Not a network, a regime. Behind him, the screen lit up, illuminating the chamber with a quote that had become infamous among those who still believed in the First Amendment. "Free speech should have consequences." Nancy Pelosi, 2020, must turn slightly toward the Speaker. "No, Madam Speaker," he said calmly. "Free speech doesn't need punishment. It needs courage." And that's what you tried to code out of existence. He turned a page in his binder. A new file appeared on the screen. Platform Policy Coordination Logs, 2020 to 2022. These weren't requests, Elon said. They were commands. Polished, sanitized, Slack threads, and emails dressed in professional language, but unmistakably authoritarian. October 2020, 2 weeks before the election. Pelosi's team asked for priority amplification of DNC-approved content and official voting resources. Everything else marked as election interference. November 2020, post-election. With tensions rising, Speaker staff demands the increased suppression of any posts about election fraud, even those based in fact. Independent voices were flagged, escalated, silenced. January 2021, coordination expands. Pelosi's office collaborates with DHS to construct a shared disinformation map. They request preemptive narrative enforcement to cement the legitimacy of the incoming administration. These weren't moderation notes. Musk said, voice steady but intense. They were playbooks. For information warfare, disinformation became a scalpel. Safety became a blunt weapon. And the trust in safety teams? No longer neutral. They had become enforcement arms of a party. Every time the truth hesitated, Elon continued. Pelosi's machine called it progress. He walked slowly across the floor, voice resonating through the still chamber. They didn't just block stories. They erased opposition, mentioned the lab leak theory, flagged, questioned voting practices, demoted, referenced Hunter Biden's laptop, silenced. Then he turned to face her. And when you were asked about this suppression, you smiled and said, free speech should have consequences. He paused. What kind of republic survives that? What kind of liberty exists when the cost of speaking your mind is the erasure of your reach, your reputation, your very presence? He clicked again. The screen displayed a new slide. Email headers from the Election Integrity Partnership. Below the title, the logos of Stanford Internet Observatory, DHS, Twitter Safety, and Pelosi's office. Also listed, Equity Policy at House.gov. Their stated purpose? To protect democracy. Their true function? A content flagging pipeline, tweets, videos, articles, all routed straight to enforcement teams. Not for being false, but for being uncomfortable. You didn't stop violence, Madam Speaker, Elon said. You stopped virality. You didn't erase lies. You erased friction. Anything that challenged your narrative was throttled before it could breathe. A new graphic filled the screen, boxes and arrows, labels and flows. Pelosi's office, policy teams, platforms, public perception. This was a command center, Elon said. A factory of thought management. Not built by tyrants in boots, but by bureaucrats in suits. And that, he said, was its most chilling brilliance. You didn't need laws or weapons. You just needed access to dashboards, to filters, to teams eager to keep your favor. And you got it. Pelosi didn't just build a political base. She engineered an ecosystem, not to inform the public, but to manage them. Elon stepped away from the glowing screen. No more slides, no more visuals, just the weight of his words. You didn't safeguard democracy. You programmed it. You taught a generation that asking questions was rebellion. That doubt was disloyalty. That silence was morality. And when persuasion failed, you filtered them out. He closed the binder in front of him. The sound echoed like a gavel falling in judgment. What you built with the DNC, with DHS, with Silicon Valley, and with friendly media outlets wasn't a town square. It was a pressure chamber. And anyone who dared to breathe differently, marked, flagged, deleted. The final words weren't shouted. They were delivered like a verdict, quiet but undeniable. This wasn't censorship. It was control, systemic, deliberate, and a betrayal of everything a free people should defend. He let the silence linger. History won't remember your slogans, he said to Pelosi. It will remember who you tried to erase, and who finally stood up and said, enough. The room felt like it was mourning, not a person, but an illusion. The illusion that power had been exercised with consent. The illusion that speech had still been free. No reporters whispered. No representatives shifted in their seats. Even the lights overhead seemed dimmer, not from power loss, but from weight. Nancy Pelosi sat composed. Still, regal in posture, but exposed in legacy. The master of political theater. The conductor of the modern narrative. Now unmasked. Not by scandal or smear, but by a man who asked for no title, carried no party flag, and wanted only the truth. Elon Musk, no longer the tech billionaire in that moment, but the voice of reckoning. This isn't about a tweet, he began again. It's not about a single election or a suppressed headline. It's about what we became and who helped turn us into it. He looked around. Lawmakers, journalists, citizens watching from their kitchens, garages, late-night bedrooms, all listening. You didn't earn your power by serving the people, he said. You maintained it by silencing them. You let the echo settle. You didn't build your legacy through ideas. You preserved it through influence dressed up as transparency, through censorship disguised as public safety, through obedience repackaged as civic virtue. Then, he turned to her one final time. You were democracy like designer fashion, but stitched inside it were fear, suppression, and control. This was not performance. It was revelation, a final X-ray of a political dynasty, showing right beneath the carefully crafted illusion of legacy. Elon didn't pace. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood, clear, steady, and speaking for those who had never been allowed in that room. The shadow banned, the muted, the erased. You didn't defend the Constitution. You outsourced it through servers, dashboards, and teams trained to obey. He lifted the binder again, not to read from it, but to close it. You turned influence into a weapon. You mass-produced silence and called it governance. But now we've seen it. This wasn't democracy, Elon said. It was a perception machine, powered by data, shielded by platforms, and enforced by silence. He faced the committee, every eye now fixed, every smirk erased. This wasn't partisanship. It was catharsis. The truth finally unmuted. You gave America the illusion of choice. But every trending story, every curated feed, every prompt was guided by you. He paused, looked at her. One last time. This isn't personal. It's historical. And history won't remember your press releases. It will remember the silence you constructed. Not the silence of peace, but of programming. Enforced by code, contracts, and cowardice. You called it safety. You called it progress. You called it democracy. He shook his head slowly. But truth never needed any of those things. It only needed a voice. And that voice was silenced. Until now, no applause, no outburst, just stillness. A reckoning, not of noise, but of truth. Not of destruction, but of unveiling. The screen behind him faded to black. The record closed. And so, too, didn't Era. Nancy Pelosi didn't fall that day. She was revealed. And when the history books open to that page, they won't say Elon Musk dismantled her with rage. They'll say he dismantled her with truth wrapped in silence. If you love this story, hit the subscribe button and make sure to like and share the video. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more incredible stories like this.